6:20, 6 June 1944, Dog Green sector, off Vieuville-sur-Mer. The Higgins boat shoulders into green water like a boxer, and diesel breath rides every wave. Private First Class Jack Carter of Company A, 116th Infantry, palms the ridges of his M1's 8-round clip as the coxswain shouts, 30 seconds! A crewman taps the ramp pin with a mallet. The smell is oil, vomit, cold iron. Over the gunwales the shore looks too far and too smooth. No promised bomb craters, only grey shingle, stakes bristling with mines, a line of obstacles crouched like teeth. They were told airmen had ploughed the sand with bombs at dawn. If the bombs fell, they fell inland, because the beach still looks brand new. The DD tanks that were supposed to nose in first are rumours on the radio. The sea is heaving a metre and more, and the horizon is a flat sheet of pewter. Jack tastes bile and salt. He checks the toggle on his lifebelt, feels for 2 grenades, thinks of the bus route back home, and forces his knees to unlock. Across the waterline, the first German position he can make out, WN-62, sits in the angle of the bluff above Colleville-sur-Mer. He can't see faces, only a black rectangle like a mouth. Doctrine says take the draws, D1 to the west, E1 and E3 ahead, but doctrine also says there would be cover. The coxswain grinds the throttle, kicks the stern. The boat pivots like a subway car and shudders. 10! The coxswain yells. 9! Stand by! Jack's squad leader, Staff Sergeant Mackay, leans forward so the men can hear him over the engine. Off the ramp and left. Keep low. Move on the pause. Watch the stakes. It sounds like a checklist in a factory, and maybe it is. Behind them, another LCVP is already angling in, and behind that, another still. Jack doesn't see them. He sees only the ramp and the green-white water beyond it. The mallet rings, the pin gives, the ramp shrieks. For a heartbeat there is nothing but wind, and it tastes of snow. Then the first tracers arrive like backward rain. The man in front of Jack takes 2 in the chest and folds without sound. Jack steps anyway because the deck is tilting and there's nowhere else to stand. He hits water, stumbles, feels the channel slam into his ribs, and comes up coughing into a world suddenly louder than thought. He forces the rifle above the surface, kicks toward a line of weed-dark stones, and in the corner of his eye the bluff opens like a lid. Somewhere up there are guns about to speak, and the only shelter on this whole beach is a handful of wet gravel, 0625, above Colleville-sur-Mer. Gefreiter Franz Gockel runs his palm across the feed cover of an MG-42 and feels the cold stampings buzz with the ship's guns out to sea. He lays 2 spare barrels on a sandbagged shelf, rags ready, asbestos glove at hand. The bunker at Widerstands Nest 62 is a box of angles. Concrete throat, slit like a letterbox, telephone to the next nest already sullen with static. He checks the range stakes painted down the slope and reads the sand as if it were a target diagram. He has been taught cadence, short burst to walk the beaten zone, longer to pin, then cut, change, cool. The loader, a boy from the Emsland with freckles, snakes the first 250-round belt across the tray. Mortar crews to the right test their tubes. A 50mm gun waits in its recess like a beetle. Their company commander said the enemy will try to take the draws, E1 and E3, because there is nowhere else to go. Doctrine is a comfort because it makes strangers predictable. Through drizzle the horizon hardens, and all at once the sea turns into geometry. Bows, ramps, square noses. He counts 6 in the first rank and another line behind them, but the haze makes counting a guess. He peers again and sees pennants, a beachmaster's language he does not speak. Far offshore, a destroyer's silhouette slides like a black comb against the sky, and the big guns inland begin to complain that the telephones are intermittent. The first wave hits the sand too clean. The bombs were supposed to chew it up. The pilots overcorrected inland, someone mutters. Gockel chooses a point, touches the butterfly trigger, and lets the gun start its tearing cloth song. Brass spills into the catcher, links spit like fish. Men fall, and for a moment, doctrine feels like prophecy. He rides the traverse, checks the rag, swaps the barrel at a slow count 250, smells hot parkerizing and singed wool. Then he looks up between belts and sees what his instructors did not show. The boats that came have become boats arriving. A ramp drops and another is already angling in behind it, as if on a schedule. He squeezes again, does his arithmetic, belts in the box, belts in the niche, barrels left, while the loader's hands go pale. The telephone buzzes once and dies. Mortars report low. It is still possible, he tells himself. It is still possible if the first waves break and the next wavers, but the next does not waver. The next behaves like the first, neat as drill. Gockel blinks, presses the triggers again, and measures the day by barrel changes instead of hours. Somewhere on the slope, a body shifts. Beyond it, the sea keeps manufacturing silhouettes. 6:28, 5 miles off Omaha, Lieutenant Sam Doyle braces his boots against the bridge coaming and tastes salt on the pencil he keeps behind his ear. The rangefinder glass is beaded with rain. The coast is a smear of grey bruise. Reports crackle thin. Tanks swamped. First wave taking fire. No craters on the sand. He sketches a bearing, calls to the plotting room, and feels the destroyer answer with a shiver that runs through the deck like a cough. Orders say keep outside 1,000 yards. Necessity raises an eyebrow. In Colville, Marie Legrand twists the deadbolt on the cafe door and guides neighbours into her cellar, the last pot of coffee going cold on the stove. Plaster sifts with every distant concussion. A paratrooper, helmet net ragged, boots mud to the laces, leans against the wall and says nothing at all. Above them the house windows breathe in and out as pressure pulses roll across the village like weather. Doyle asks for confirmation on the 741st Tank Battalion and gets a fog of words that add up to this. Of 29 amphibious tanks launched on the western run-in, 27 went under in the chop. He stares at the bluff through the haze and thinks of armour that is not coming and of infantry who will come anyway, because there are more boats in the wake and more behind them. Neptune's sea train is the size of a nation, nearly 7,000 vessels of every draft and job, an arithmetic that can close distance by simply insisting. He puts his voice low and calm on the TBS, the talk between ships circuit. Coming left. Prepare to close. The helmsman glances at him once and says, Aye. The bow swings. Spray slashes across the bridge windows, and the ship's shadow begins to walk down the beach as if it had a mind of its own. Out on the sand, a signal panel flaps in gusts. A soaked forward observer guns his radio and chews his lip. The first ranging salvo goes long, geysers stepping neatly above the embrasure. Down 100. The next catches the face and smokes concrete. On the third, Doyle hears the armour-piercing scream before the impact and sees the slit go black like an eye suddenly shut. He looks at the range drum, 950 yards, and wonders how close a tin can go before it stops being a ship and becomes a target. Steady as she goes, he says, and the ship breathes in, breathing the men on the beach with it. In the cellar, Marie counts between thunderclaps and loses the count when a nearer roar flattens her lamps. On the bridge, Doyle wipes his pencil, sets a new line, and leans into a day that will be measured in yards and in tons. 6:30 H hour. The ramp hits and the ocean comes inside the boat. Jack steps into chest-deep water and the channel shoulder-checks him hard enough to strip the breath from his ribs. Someone to his right vanishes under a slap of green and does not come back. The world is a churn of cork helmets, gas mask bags, and the hard drag of cartridge belts. Ahead, the only shelter is a black ribbon of shingle, where waves rake and suck with the appetite of a living thing. He remembers the briefing, move on the pause, and he learns the pause by ear because the gun above the bluff speaks in a language of timings. The MG-42 does not drum. It rips. Short, long, and then a breath for the barrel change. In that breath, men rise and throw themselves forward, and in the next burst, some of them do not rise again. Jack stumbles behind a Belgian gate, counts to 3, and runs for the stones. Shrapnel whirs like angry hornets. Sand spits against his cheeks. An engineer with a roll of Bangalore torpedo bellies in next to him. The man's hands are grey with clay and fear. "Fuse," he grunts. Jack shelters the match with his body. The first sputters and dies. The second flares, a bead of white in the rain that feels foreign. They shove the tube under the wire, turn their faces, and the beach kicks them both with a flat, concussive foot. For a heartbeat, the gun on the bluff stutters. They crawl through the gap with 2 more men, then flatten, listening to mortars hunt the shingle crest like a blind animal. The plan had a grammar. DD tanks first, then infantry. The C erased the first clause, so the second is being rewritten under fire. To the west, the draw at D-1 throws off sprays of dust where shells bite into the bank. Ahead, E1 and E3 still spit. A ranger with a demolition bag joins them without preamble. "Follow the fold," he says, pointing at a wrinkle in the bluff that might be a path and might be a shooting lane if the enemy has patience. Jack can feel the beach's shape through his elbows, the way the shingle hides a shallow dip, the way the water sucks a little harder where the bottom shelves. He hears a voice with authority in it, not a shout exactly, telling men to group by 2s and 3s. He pushes a clip into the garand. It seats with the metallic kiss every manual described, and the sound steadies him. When the MG's voice falters, he will get up and move. That is the whole law. He tastes iron and salt, and the law feels simple if not easy. He waits for the next breath in ripping song, like his mother taught him, and climbs toward the fold in the hill that looks like hope. 0645 to 0730, the beach begins to show its machinery. From the slit of WN62, Franz Gockel sees not a mob, but a schedule. Ramps slam, boats reverse, prop wash claws at the sand, and coxswains heel over with a finesse learned in boatyards half a world away. Beachmasters step into the fire with flags and pistols and a vocabulary of arm signals that could land a moonshot. Every time the gun cools, another grey bow is already pointing in. The rhythm feels less like battle and more like a factory clock that refuses to admit error. Jack notices it too in stolen glances. Coloured panels snapped in the wind. Semaphore squares held chest high by sailors whose faces are as calm as foremen's. A dozer lurches off a ramp and noses into the shingle like a bull, then turns, blade flashing, to push a lane. Tanks appear where no tanks should be. 743rd Battalion brought straight into sand to replace what the channel swallowed. A sergeant claps Jack's shoulder and says, "Move on the draw when the tin cans crack it." And Jack believes him, because the ships out there look eager and angry. Gockel's discipline keeps the barrel changes neat, 300 rounds at most before the glove and the swap. The loader's hands shake and then steady. Mortarmen report low. A runner from the next nest arrives breathless and empty. The telephone line snaps dead as if someone cut it with a knife. He fires short, long, and watches men drop. He lifts again and finds more men where the first had been. The gun sings, but the song is being drowned by a deeper note. Ship guns stepping down the surf like a drummer coming off the riser. Jack's squad knots with strays. 1st Division shoulder patches beside 29th, a ranger with a satchel charge and 2 fuses that hate the damp. They breathe on the matches, coaxing sparks like monks tending an ember. 1 gap in the wire becomes 3. When the MG-42 speaks again, Jack learns to count its breath and move in it. The M1 in his hands answers with a steady, almost civilized cadence that feels like a covenant. You do your part, I will do mine. By 7:30, the sand is a ledger of wreckage and intent. Bangalores have chewed teeth out of the obstacles. The shingle gleams with brass and water. Boat crews pivot and go, pivot and return, as if the coastline had gears and they knew every tooth. Jack learns the law fast. Move with the tempo and you live. Hesitate and you become a punctuation mark in the stones. Over his shoulder, an LCVP lifts its ramp. In its place, another settles. Same angle, same noise, different men. The enemy can break bodies, he thinks, but they cannot break this tempo. 8 o'clock, the destroyer gathers itself like a sprinter in the blocks. Lieutenant Sam Doyle smells wet paint and cordite as spray knifes across the bridge windows. Orders were to hold outside 1,000 yards. The problem with orders, he thinks, is that they are written for days when no one is pinned flat on a beach. He speaks into the TBS in a tone that would not alarm a child. Coming left. Prepare to close. The helmsman says, "Aye," and the bow swings toward water so shallow it wears a different colour. The first ranging salvo goes tall and white beyond the slit. Down 100. The second throws dust from the face. Add 50. On the third, the embrasure turns black like an eye suddenly shut. The ship is inside 950 now, closer than Doctrine's comfort, and the 5-inch 38 seconds are talking in a rapid language that makes the deck shudder 4 beats to the minute. A soaked forward observer on easy red keys, a handset that crackles like frying bacon and walks the fire left, then right, then up the slope like a saw blade. Concrete, which all morning had been a word for fate, becomes a soluble problem. Magazines are open. Shellmen move like watch parts. The gun captains sing the liturgy, shot out, and the director answers with numbers that compress yards into clicks of a handwheel. Somewhere aft, a cook is tying down a coffee urn that will not stay put. The ship's log will later tabulate an impossible-sounding day, more than 1,000 5-inch rounds from a single destroyer, each shell a steel argument hurled less than a kilometre from its target. It is the naval version of the truth on the sand. The fix for an unsolved equation is volume applied precisely until the constants change. Across the beach, men recognise the change by the way the ground behaves. Jack feels the shock coming through his elbows from the shingle as sequences of bracketing bursts learn the bluff's shape. A bunker coughs dust and then, abruptly, stops having a mouth. An engineer team rises into the lull and runs a last length of Bangalore under teeth of wire. The detonation punches a door into the morning. He moves on the pause because now the pause is wider. Franz Gockel experiences it as subtraction. The telephone goes dead for good. The mortar crew to his right packs up its tube, no bombs left, and crawls. The loader burns his fingers even through the glove. The gun still rips, but the intervals between rip and rip stretch as belts thin, as smoke thickens, as the deck of a ship out there keeps breathing fire on the cliff. Doyle wipes his pencil on his sleeve, sets a new line, and thinks, almost gently, that getting closer still would be best. 9 a.m. The beach smells of salt, hot metal, and the faint sweetness of crushed plants where the bluff begins. Smoke lies along the sand like a low ceiling. Jack's world narrows to a strip of wire and a wrinkle of earth that looks like a path. An engineer sergeant with 2 caps left trades a look that is equal parts permission and prayer. They light the last fuse with a match shielded by cupped hands. The Bangalore slides under the rusted comb. The blast is a flat hand clapped against the morning. Teeth of wire jump and fall. The gap is ugly and good. A voice with the gravel of authority rides the wind, not quite a shout. It says the sentence that turns men from debris into a unit. You can't stay here. They gather by 2s and 3s around that grammar and climb. The bluff is not a wall, they discover, but a set of folds and shelves. Someone points at E1 and E3, the drawers that will release the beach if turned into roads. Mortar shells walk behind them in a stalking rhythm. Ahead, machine gun fire snaps high through grass and gorse. Jack tastes dirt and metal and keeps low, because low is the difference between being a statistic and being a man with a job to do. The job acquires tools as they move. A bar team joins, its gun tied with a strip of torn shirt where the sling failed. A phone line spools off a radio man's shoulder. He coughs, swears, and keeps climbing. At the edge of a field, they find a hedgerow thick as a city wall and learn, fast, the way to worm along its roots. A Sherman that wasn't supposed to be here at all noses into a fold and, hull down, tosses a 75mm shell up a farm track where a flash had been. The air goes glassy for an instant and then settles with a rain of dust. Below them, the beach is busy with logistics. Beach battalion sailors set casualty triangles and pull men out of the water. A dozer drags an obstacle aside with a chain. The smell of coffee rides a gust. Jack reloads, the Garand's metallic kiss as comforting as a psalm, and notes that his hands have stopped shaking. He is not in a movie. He is in a system that expects him to move forward, and so he does, because the system is now winning its argument with the morning. At the top of the first shelf, he looks back and down and sees, for the first time, that the sea no longer owns the day. The shingle is a deck, a staging area where boats arrive, unload and leave with the metronome confidence of a factory whistle. He ducks as a last long burst rips the grass and then lifts into the next fold, where the ground begins to tilt toward inland. Approximately 10 to 11, WN62 feels smaller by the minute. Franz Gockel cracks a munitions can and knows by the way the lid lifts that it is lighter than it should be. The loader's bandaged fingers feed the belt with lips pressed white. A runner arrives from the neighbouring point with dust in his eyebrows and news that is not news. The telephone will not hold a line, mortar rounds are nearly gone, and the company wants fires held for targets of value, which is to say, for everything. Gockel nods without looking up. He works the traverse and tries not to think about numbers. Numbers refuse to be ignored. At 250 rounds, he swaps the barrel with the rag and the glove, listens to the sizzle, snaps the latch, and touches the slotted shroud to make sure heat has somewhere to go. He keeps the bursts short, but the optics are smudged with powder and rain. He leans his cheek to the cold of the stock, tastes metal, and moves the cone of fire across a strip of sand where men are gathering behind the shingle as if it were the lip of a trench. He fires, and they scatter, and when he lifts, they gather again. The rhythm is maddening, subtraction that leads to the same sum. Above the sea, a destroyer prowls like a wolf fishing the shallows. Its shells come in series, bracket, correct, finish, and the cliff face learns new shapes as concrete chips away to reveal raw aggregate. Somewhere behind Gockel, an older water-cooled MG-08 clacks in dignified protest, a museum piece made violent by necessity. He never expected to be grateful for anything about the old gun, but it does not overheat, and today that feels like grace. He sends the loader to the rear niche for belts and gets a look that admits the truth. There are fewer now. He thinks of the briefing maps and the calm arrows drawn on them, and cannot reconcile those neat lines with this messy arithmetic. Reserves that should counterattack sit still because skies are hostile and roads are watched. Every time the MG-42 pauses, another ramp out there drops. He has killed men today. He knows that as surely as he knows the serial number on the receiver, and yet he has not moved the day forward by an inch. The optics fog. He wipes them with a knuckle and sees an American with a Red Cross brassard run bent over through smoke. Two more follow with a litter. Mercy under these guns, he thinks, and does not fire for 3 heartbeats because his loader fumbles the link and he needs that moment to fit the teeth back in. When the belt seats and he touches the trigger, the gun rips obediently, but somewhere in the back of his head a different machine is running, a factory that never exhausts its shifts, sending boats where he sends bullets. Approximately 11 to 13, the day tilts. Jack reaches the crest of a fold with a handful of men who did not begin the morning together. Behind them, the beach has changed colour, from pale death to busy brown, because movement is life and the beach is moving now. Ahead, the first strong point that loomed in every thought is only a slab of concrete with a blackened mouth, A white cloth shows once and wavers. Someone calls, "Hold your fire," and the squad obeys because obedience to good sense is how you stay standing. A Sherman sits hull down in a ditch like a beast at a waterhole. The tank commander points with 2 fingers. The gunner nods inside his turret cave. 75mm of argument walks up a farm track and takes the corner off a wall. A bar team saws at a hedge, stitching leaves and the suspicion of targets. The radio that has weighed like a punishment all morning finally buys its way to redemption. A forward observer gets a ship on the net, corrects 200 left, add 100, and a brace of naval shells carve steps up the bluff toward the next nest. The geometry of killing has reversed. Civilians exist again. Marie Legrand opens her cellar and guides a bleeding private into the kitchen light. She tears a tablecloth into a bandage and boils water that smells faintly of coffee grounds and cordite. The village has windows again, though none of the glass is where it belongs. Outside, 2 children stare, then run when a distant burst reminds them that the day is not done. Marie sets out a cup and says, in a voice that has served customers for years, that he must drink slowly. Franz Gockel, ears wrung by near misses, peers through optics that fog and clarifies by turns. A water-cooled gun to his rear still clacks. His own receiver is hot enough to brand a thumb. He knows the barrels by weight now, knows the loader's breath, knows the metallic taste in his mouth. He also knows, with the clarity that sometimes follows exhaustion, that the arithmetic can no longer be made to work. When he lifts his head between bursts, the sea is not a mystery but a method. Ramps keep dropping, flags keep snapping, destroyers keep erasing. By early afternoon, 34,000 Americans will be ashore on Omaha, a number that would have sounded absurd to any machine gun section asked to stop it with belts and doctrine. The men on the bluff taste the wind and learn humility. The men on the sand taste dust and learn confidence. Jack looks back once and, for the first time, sees resupply lines snaking across the water like veins. He turns away from the sea and toward the interior, not because he has stopped fearing the beach, but because the beach has done its work and made room for the next necessary miles. Evening settles like a truce written in smoke. Bulldozers growl where breakers had broken men, dragging obstacles toward piles, pushing lanes that will be roads by morning. Navy Beach Battalion sailors mark casualty triangles and wave in craft with hand flags, then light cigarettes whose coals look indecently cheerful. Jack accepts a tin cup of coffee streaked with fuel and sugar and tastes luxury. He can stand without feeling the sky reach down to erase him. That alone feels like advance. The day, translated, is a ledger. About 34,000 Americans came ashore on Omaha despite a surf that drowned tanks and a bombardment that left too much concrete alive. About 2,400 became casualties there before midnight, killed, wounded, missing, numbers that are both smaller and larger than memory will allow. Offshore, destroyers wrote their own column, a single ship expending more than 1,000 5-inch rounds at ranges under a kilometre, a fact as implausible as it is recorded in neat ink by a yeoman whose handwriting will never smell like cordite. Above the horizon, the armada that brought them numbered nearly 7,000 vessels, everything from battleships to tugs, a floating city with war for a purpose. The purpose is continuity. Higgins boats, LCVPS by the book, ran their shuttle so precisely that men began to trust the rhythm and move with it. Dozers did their indelicate magic. Tankers brought fresh tracks where the sea had swallowed the first. Radios that squealed all morning learned, by patience and practice, to speak intelligibly to ships and guns and the men between. The system that looked like hubris at dawn looked like competence by dusk. The transformation is the story. Zoom out, and the beach becomes an inlet for something continental. Before June is out, the Normandy lodgment will swallow 850,000 troops, 150,000 vehicles, and more than 500,000 tons of supplies, ammunition, fuel, rations, spares, an input so great the enemy will start measuring their future in shortages rather than plans. Numbers this large can seem like boasting until you stand where Jack stands and recognize that each crate is breath and endurance for someone not yet here. He rinses the cup with seawater, pockets a chocolate square for later, and looks inland. Somewhere up there are lanes with names, fields that will grow, villages with clocks that tell hours instead of bombardments. The ledger closes on the day not with triumph, but with momentum. It says in plain numerals that the system works when courage arrives on schedule and steel keeps its appointments. Doyle, on his quieted bridge, signs the gunnery sheet and flexes fingers that smell of pencil lead. Marie sweeps glass from her cafe floor with a borrowed broom and finds, to her surprise, the coffee still warm on the stove. Somewhere behind them cranes are swinging cargo from new arrivals. The night will not be silent, but it will belong to the builders. June into July, the map begins to breathe. This is an explicit jump in time, the camera pulling back to watch the lodgement swell. Roadheads sprout like roots along the coast. Engineers lay steel matting where mud would make a liar of any schedule. Convoys practice a kind of patience the front lines never see, headlights hooded, drivers counting miles by fence posts and prayers. The beach where Jack crawled becomes a port without a city, a throat swallowing tonnage and exhaling columns toward hedgerows that fight back like living walls. Jack learns new faces faster than names because replacements arrive with the regularity of tides. Company rosters grow and shrink and grow. Mess lines serve coffee that no longer tastes of gasoline. Mail appears, so does soap. The luxury is not softness, but continuity, the knowledge that the next day will not be starved. His garand, wiped nightly with a rag that smells of oil and salt, keeps its covenant. The platoon's BAR breathes its own rhythm. A tank platoon lurches by with a maintenance truck already tethered to the tail like a remora fish. Franz Gockel sits behind wire and tries to give words to a day that refuses to be honest on the tongue. He tells a fellow prisoner that they did as taught, and for a while it worked, and then the sea kept making men. He says this without bitterness and surprises himself by the lack. He remembers barrel changes more than faces. He remembers the moment he understood that he was firing at a schedule and not a crowd. He says almost gently that the arithmetic beat them. In headquarters farther inland, German staff officers draft arrows that bow backward by the week. Fuel vouchers look like fiction. Ammunition scales turn parsimonious. Air makes daytime movement a rash gamble. Reports identify the enemy by the shape of their methods rather than the paint on their helmets. Destroyers too near, logistics too smooth, air too constant, infantry too ready to improvise. Tradition, which once served as confidence, begins to sound like a story told to children. Meanwhile, the American numbers keep writing the plot. Truck parks spill across fields in disciplined rows. A supply sergeant notes, with a pride that feels private, that tonnage targets are met again. By month's end, the lodgement's intake looks like murder by math to anyone counting from the other side. Jack sees only the effects: stacks of rations, pyramid corners of ammunition crates, replacement helmets in bales. He pockets another chocolate square for a kid in a ruined doorway and steps back into line. The shock that began in a bunker travels along roads and rails until it becomes policy. Attack because the system can feed it. Weeks later, the hill above Omaha is quiet enough to hear grass tick against stone. White markers rise in ranks so tidy they look like they have always been there. Jack stands with a ranger he barely knew at dawn and a chaplain who seems older than any war. They read names, years, sometimes only a state. Bedford, Virginia is carved more than once. He breaks a chocolate square into thirds and hands the extra to the chaplain, who tucks it into a pocket for someone else. Down the slope, the beach works without drama. Cranes swing cargo from rhino ferries. Jeeps cough, then scamper away in columns. A dozer backs and turns and backs again, patient as a farmhand. The numbers that once sounded like boasting now feel like housekeeping. The ledger for June closes on 850,000 troops landed across Normandy, 150,000 vehicles, and more than 500,000 tons of supplies, enough steel, fuel and food to turn a toehold into a continent's hinge. A destroyer's gunnery sheet notes more than 1,000 rounds expended at dagger range on D-Day. The paper does not look any heavier for what it says. Franz Gockel, moved to a rear cage, hears a guard speaking slow German learned from a grandmother. The man offers a cigarette. Gockel accepts, then declines a second out of habit and is told he can take 2. It is a small moment of abundance and it stings in an unexpected place. He tries again to explain to himself the morning when the sea became a manufacturing line. He settles for a sentence he will repeat for years. There were more men in one boat than in our whole bay. He does not mean the arithmetic literally. He means the feeling, that the other side had found a way to make courage renewable. Marie Legrand sweeps glass from her café floor with a borrowed broom, sets fresh cups on scarred wood, and ties wildflowers at the church door. She will remember the smell of cordite every time the oven is too hot. She will remember the American who said thank you in schoolbook French and left 2 sugar cubes for her children. The village clock works again. It tells hours now, not bombardments. Jack writes a letter he cannot complete. He tries to explain that victory on Omaha did not look like a flag in a photograph. It looked like Higgins boats cycling on time, like destroyers breaking rules until the rules broke, like engineers who ran fuses with shaking hands, like sergeants who said 5 words that changed the physics of fear. It looked like a system that could afford to fail in parts and still win in whole. He signs without flourish. He folds the page and watches the tide smooth the morning's footprints. Far offshore, another convoy forms, and somewhere on its manifest there is room for the future.